Finance and Administration Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Alderman Art Woods.
Here.
Alderman Curielli.
Here.
Alderman Messina. Alderman Sismarski.
Here.
Alderwoman Ames.
Here.
Alderman Artie Woods.
Here.
And Alderman Catalano.
Here.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 23rd, 2025.
So move. Second.
Are there any questions? Alderman Artwood?
Yeah, give me 1 second, I can find the one on the recaps of my comments. My comment was on the sewer pipes going through buildings was more a concern of the legality of having a pipe go through the building. Do we have easements? It really didn't have anything to do with cost of construction. Would be the only correction. I'll give the verbiage to the minute taker.
Okay, okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, or corrections? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes. Tonight, for report and recommendation, we have the fiscal year 2026 budget report. Director Wilson, I believe you have a presentation prepared for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Welcome to fiscal 26 budget night. If anybody needs an extra copy of the budget document.
I'm good.
Okay. We do have a couple of extra copies here in case anybody needs one, if anybody. All right, so the slide deck, I know you should have received it last Friday in the packet, but it looks very similar to previous years. I'm trying to keep the format consistent year over year, a couple of tweaks, every year to as we refine things going forward, but largely try to keep the same format and process every year going forward. So again, we'll start with just the very high level, the different fund types we have. So we have the general fund, which I think we all know is the main operational fund for the city, as departments of administration, community development, finance, police. If we had fire would be in there as well. Obviously, they're a separate district, but just by way of informational, fire would be also included in the general fund if we had a fire department. And then public works, non-water is also included in the general fund. Special revenue, we have 8 funds this year, up from 7 with the inclusion of TIF 4. Special revenue funds are funds where the revenues are, well, they're special, right? They're earmarked by state statute for certain purposes and restricted for those purposes, such as motor fuel tax, the things that they're limited for, tourism, for the promotion of the community. And then TIF, the TIF funds obviously for use within the TIF projects and development of the area there within. The capital projects funds, we have the capital project fund itself, the CIP. That meeting was held back in January. Then we have the land acquisition fund. This year there's no expenses planned in the land acquisition fund. We will still present it, but for right now there's nothing planned in there. The enterprise funds, those are the business type activity funds. So that's the commuter parking lot, sanitation fund, that's where we pay Flood Brothers out of. And then the water and sewer fund, which I know you're all familiar with. The internal service fund, that's SURF, the vehicle replacement fund. And then the fiduciary funds, this year we only have the one, being the police pension fund. Last year we had 2, the special service area fund, but that has been closed out during this fiscal year since all of the debt service on bonds for areas 12, 13, and 14 have been paid off. So there's nothing to report this year for the special service area fund. So it's kind of setting the table for where we're going to go this evening as we move through the deck and the binder. So of those 16 funds, 9 have a proposed increase, 7 have a proposed drawdown. The drawdowns were all, I guess, planned, if you will. They all have, meaning behind them, purpose behind them. And then capital spending, obviously, as discussed in the CIP, we still try to align everything the best we can, so we're not, paving a road and then the next year digging it up to put a water main in, and then 2 years later digging it up to do something with the sewer, trying to align things to the greatest extent possible that we can between the different departments and divisions going forward. So again, as we do every year, the process, each department or fund has its own sheet here in the deck and then its own tab in the budget binder. There are no expanded level items this year, so if you were looking for the green or red sheets, you didn't find any. That's a good thing. If you did find one, I guess I'd like to see the book because I didn't put any in. So, you know, then we'll try to gain consensus on each department or each fund before we move on. Obviously, if something comes up later, we can go back and address something, but to the greatest extent possible, we'd like to try to keep this, you know, gain consensus before moving on, so we're not, you know, hopscotching back and forth, again, to the greatest extent possible. So we're going to begin with the overview of the entire budget, and then again go through the different fund types as I laid out a couple slides ago. Just from a timeline, February 27th, that's today. Go through as much as possible, and if that's everything, that's great. If it's not, then you know the next we'll finish up whatever we don't get to tonight on March 13th. I know the past few years we've been able to get through everything, so you know, cautiously optimistic, but we do have that backup date if need be. All right, so going into very high level budget overview. So this is all revenues and expenses, less transfers. Because interfund transfers, all it does is it increases the revenue and the expenses by the same amount, so it's a zero sum at the end of the day. So we pull those out for purposes of this overview. Part of the reason that the revenue in 25 projected and also the expenses in 25 projected are a little bit higher than we thought was because of the line of credit, the payoffs. We did that bond issue in January, so that money's in revenue, and then that money's also on the expense side paying off the line of credit. So if you take out that, you know, that 8 million, 8.5 million, those numbers are a lot closer on the revenue side to the budgeted number. And then on the expense side, down about 10 million. It's due largely to the water tower not being completed, the light, which was also included in the budget, and some of the bridge. So there's nothing really concerning with these projected numbers. Like I said, the bond issue and paying off the line of credit did kind of inflated the numbers a little bit, but nothing that was really concerning given what we know about the state of the construction projects and some of the other funds. Going through the budget, unless otherwise noted, personnel costs are up due to salaries per the city's compensation policy and union contracts. All healthcare costs are up 5% based on the preliminary renewal information we received from IPBC. The city's IMRF rate went down 0.6% this year. IMRF had a better than expected year. They beat their actuarial assumptive rate of return last year, so the rate did drop down a little bit this year, which was helpful. And then again, as we've done in past years, you know, there's a reason on some of these slides for why certain categories are higher or lower than in previous budget years. That's a non-exhaustive list. So for example, if office supplies changed by, you know, $10, I'm probably not going to note that, but if something changed by a significant amount on a percentage basis or a monetary basis, again, to the greatest extent possible, we did try to note those on the slides for that particular fund or department. And try to keep this conversational, you know, ask questions as we go through the slides. Again, if we're trying to gain consensus on departments and funds and sections as we go through, typically you have a hard time gaining consensus without, you know, perhaps talking some things out. So if there is anything that comes up, try to address it while we're on that slide, and then move forward accordingly. This is probably my favorite slide that I prepared this year, the expanded level summary. None. I think, Jeff, this is the first time we've had none, right? And probably ever, I think, right? Yeah. So, yeah, this was an easy one to put together tonight. So this year's budget, the personnel update was a little bit interesting. This is actually the table that's included in the budget message, the letter transmittal that's in the budget document and behind the introduction tab. So, you know, none of the positions that were eliminated, just to be clear for, you know, the council and everybody at home, there were no actual people in any of those positions that were removed. So we didn't riff anybody, lay anybody off, anything like that. So those are all positions that were vacant for one reason or another and for varying periods of time. Then you can see the two added positions there, a management analyst in administration and an assistant director in the community development department. There were also two title changes. Director of Admin Services went to Director of HR, And then the accounting manager went to assistant finance director. Then there were 4 people that were reallocated, either partially or in totality, from one fund or department to another. So we had the fiscal assistant 1, went to utilities from the finance department. Community relations director went from administration to tourism. The executive assistant admin, 50% went from admin to tourism. And then the dial-a-ride driver went from tourism into streets. So as we're going through, working through the budget, and also kind of reflecting on some of the conversations we had over the past year, you know, these positions that we reallocated them to more accurately reflect the cost center for the jobs that they're doing going forward. So, you know, this was done to, again, try to align these positions with the work that they were doing going forward.
Alderman Messina.
Quick question. So, I'm not hinting towards this, but if for some reason we were to have a hit on our tourism fund, COVID, would that put these actual positions at risk of being eliminated? Not that it would, you know, but.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, I think that would be, you know, I mean, heaven forbid we have something like that come up again.
Yep.
That would honestly be something we'd have to reassess, you know, as a city and what we wanted to do. Right now, again, as you know, Ms. Silva, you know, is heavily involved in the special events. So if we pull back on that and, you know, were to reassign some of her roles, you know, perhaps back in the administration department more or whatever, then perhaps we would have to reclassify that or something. So we'd have to definitely, you know, have a conversation and reassess, you know, that situation. I would hate to think that something like that would cost somebody a job, but we just have to reassess the situation.
But legally, could we just switch her? So let's say something happened like COVID out of blue, could we, in the middle of a fiscal year, reassign the business unit that she is aligned to? Or, I don't mean she, but that group is aligned to?
Director Wilson.
Technically, we could.
Okay.
Just depending on budget authority and what else was going on, we might have to do a budget amendment or something like that, but there would be a mechanism to do that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Art Woods, did you have a question?
Yes. So going back to the eliminated positions, deputy clerk, refresh my memory, who's doing all those functions?
Director Wilson.
I'm going to defer to Director
Director
Ibarras.
Thank you. So the
I knew I'd
functions.
draw you out of that back corner.
Yeah. The functions of the deputy clerk, we're coming up to a year of us implementing a FOIA software that helped automate a lot of the procedures that position was doing. And then we also included our intern to kind of help making sure that we have our ordinances and resolutions properly posted on our website, and then storing the hard physical copies in our binders. So a lot of that has been, again, streamlined through the FOIA software that we implemented.
Follow up?
Yeah, so who's the FOIA officer, right? So we had to have somebody, there's a couple other functions that require somebody to be an officer, ADA compliance or something there needs to be. I thought that was all taken care of under the deputy clerk.
Thank you. So the FOIA officer is now me, so I'm the one listed as the FOIA officer for the city, and then we also have a FOIA officer designated for our police records FOIAs. Anything that we need to sign off on that the deputy clerk would normally sign off of is having my signature.
Okay, thank you.
Please continue.
All right, so moving on. Again, this is very similar to previous years, the different departments, divisions within the general fund. The one change this year is the building maintenance accounts are now under Public Works Administration. In previous years, they had been listed under the Community Development section, but the Public Works analyst is now handling the administration of a lot of those contracts. So it made sense to relocate those that budget into the Public Works Administration division where the Public Works Management Analyst is. So again, nothing changed aside just from what page it's presented on. So going into the general fund, I guess, the fiscal 24, based upon the budget projections, is estimated to end with a surplus of $129. So it's about as break-even of a year as we're estimating as you could get. You know, we were estimating about 145,000. You can see that the revenues are probably gonna, you know, are estimated to come in about 167,000 below, and the expenses about 21,000 below. And then this year, the apologies, I should say 26, projected budget has surplus of just under $24,000. The budget's that's there before you this evening, that's being presented. So in the general fund, here's the summary of the revenues. Just some highlights on this. Taxes, the increase in taxes is driven largely by property taxes, an increase in income tax. Utility taxes, you may recall during the CIP meeting, we moved the entirety of the utility tax into the general fund as opposed to just the percentage that was going in there previously, and a slight increase in sales tax. There was a decrease in telecom tax and use taxes. I believe we did touch on that again at the CIP meeting, where the state guidance from the IML saying that use tax is going to go down, but they're expecting sales tax to go up. As the use tax goes down, as more people are reporting through the sales tax mechanism as opposed to use taxes. License and permits. Just an interesting note, we did combine the plan review fees and building permits. We checked with CD, and they're all kind of in that building permit line item now. In previous years, it had been broken out, but it's all in the same line item now. So we did consolidate that. Charges for services, a slight decrease in cable franchise fees, but that was offset a little bit by an increase in the police department reimbursement for the officer at Fenton. Every year salaries go up, insurance costs go up. That cost for that officer does go up a little bit. Fines, fees, and forfeitures was down, related to some decreases in police department revenues. Interest investment income is higher. Just, you know, interest rates are staying higher, I think longer than people had initially thought when the Fed started dropping the rates, especially after the last couple of meetings. Sounds like they're going to kind of stay where they're at now for a while. So I'm going to be able to try to maximize some interest earnings, generate a little additional revenue on the city's money. Increase in other, so miscellaneous other, due to admin adjudication, fines and fees related to admin adjudication. And then the transfers, once you account for the transfer from the special service area, transfers were flat year over year. So that's the kind of the high level summary on the revenues for the general fund.
Alderman Artwood.
Yeah, Brad, so the taxes, 25 versus 26, what's included in taxes? Is that just real estate taxes? Is that sales tax? You could.
Yeah, so again, the vast majority of that increase is in the utility taxes being moved into the general fund. But in that taxes section, we have property taxes, the PPRT, which that's 50,000, so that's not a significant number. Income tax, which is the per capita money we get from the state. Sales tax, pull tabs and jar games for a whopping $1,200. That's typically at the VFW, you know, the pull tabs that they sell. There is a cannabis tax. That's a per capita fee that every town gets to help with you know, education and abatement services if people need that. The use tax, telecommunications tax, again, and then utility tax, which, like I said, we moved the entirety of that into the general fund from the capital projects fund for this particular budget year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue.
So summary of the expenses. You can see there again, personnel is up a little bit again. We did talk about some of those personnel changes, which that's all encompassing of that and those healthcare costs. Contractual services is largely driven by increases in legal and then community development and police department contractual fees. Decrease in capital outlay was largely due to no expandable items last year. There was a couple of expandable items in the police department specifically that bumped that number up, so it's just coming down as those items are not included in this year's budget. And then the increase in other is related to the police pension fund contribution. That contribution went up about $330,000. So all other line items in the other miscellaneous category came down a little bit. But like I said, that police pension funding request went up a little over $330,000. So that more than accounted for the increase in the other section of the expenses for the general fund. So getting into the first operating department, administration. Again, you can see the cost there, and again, personnel was down. Again, we reallocated 1.5 employees out to the tourism fund, and then there were also 2 vacant positions that were eliminated. However, we added the management analyst position in, so that's the net effect of all that, with raises and then the healthcare costs included in that. And then the increase in contractual, as I just mentioned, mostly in legal, slight increase in IT. It was really a recalibration of IT between maintenance agreements and professional services. So there wasn't a huge increase in IT. It's more in the legal category. So if we go into the breakdown by division within the administration department, again, you can see there legal being up. Curiously, the general legal line item, which is typically Mr. Bond and his firm, was actually up a fair amount. And since there's no union contracts up this year, we dropped the legal budget down quite a bit. So even though the net effect's only about $11,000, the general portion of the legal budget was up a fair amount greater than this. Again, it was offset by a decrease in legal due to the fact that there was no upcoming union contract in fiscal '26. Moving on to community development. Again, the increase in personnel is due to the inclusion of the assistant CD director position, offset a little bit by the elimination of the building administrator position. And then again, in the contractual, which is up quite a bit due to the professional fees and services related to inspections and plan review fees. So I think that was the previous audit, and then even in this fiscal year, that was one of the anomalies that was brought up. We weren't sure. With the staff, that number had been a little bit lower, but obviously without the staff, relying on the vendors to do that, that number's was quite a bit higher than we had anticipated. We think we have it pegged now, but that's why there's that increase in that particular line item.
Please continue.
Finance, as mentioned on the earlier slide, we did reallocate 1 staff member out to the water and sewer fund. That position, I guess that desk, had previously been a position that was more, general fund focused. However, this position now, the preponderance of her work is assisting and doing utility billing functions. And since the utility billing is out of the water fund, we felt it appropriate to reallocate that particular staff member to the water and sewer fund. And decrease in other, slight decrease in sales tax rebates. As we're monitoring those, we kind of see how they're coming in throughout the year. And how they're trending, and also in this next year, that's one of the years where one of the agreements that has a terrace or a step approach to the percentage that they get back. It does drop down a little bit, so we felt comfortable lowering this to $10,000 to kind of acknowledge the decrease in their payout for their particular sales tax agreement.
Alderman Artwood.
So explain to me a little bit more the personnel decrease due to reallocating certain staff to water sewer fund. Did they do a different function? Did we move them to a different building? I'm just trying to understand how those things changed.
Director Wilson.
Sure. Yeah, so the previous person we had in that, I guess at that desk, which is the one right when you walk into the finance department, was titled executive assistant. So they were my executive assistant, I guess, if you will. And so when she left, the person we hired was a fiscal assistant 1 to assist with utility billing. So we weren't sure when we hired that position how much of the work they were really going to be assisting with utility billing and how much was going to kind of help out accounts payable, accounts receivable. As we've been through the year and a half, they're probably 98% utility billing, just through cashiering, batches, answering phones, scheduling appointments, things of that nature. And again, since the utility billing function is out of the water and sewer fund, and she technically reports to the utility billing coordinator supervisor, it made sense at that point, since again, significant preponderance of her work was doing water and sewer fund work, to put her into the water and sewer fund from a budgeting standpoint.
And so,
Follow up?
so part of that switch, right, because things don't just disappear, would part of that switch over or change over be due to the change in title to Assistant Finance Director, taking some of those things away from that person?
Director Wilson?
No, yeah, no. I think that title change would actually help take things away from me to give to her.
Well, I'm just trying to understand that typically functions don't disappear. So if the prior person did 10 different things, right, and now they're only doing 3 things that pertain to what happened to the 7, I guess is what I'm trying to understand.
Okay,
Director Wilson?
okay.
Yeah, better,
Yeah. So I guess of those 7, so the person that was in the position before did some of these same functions, but this current role has been more expanded, and some of the, I know some of those 7 things, yes, have gone to the accounting manager, me, assistant finance director. A couple of them I just took back, and then a couple of them went to the management analyst, the financial analyst in the department. So a couple of the I don't want to say easier things, but more mundane things, we did kind of free up from that person to focus more on the utility billing side of things.
okay, thank you, because that makes more sense to me then. Now I get it.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't get the question first, but yeah, that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And go on.
So the police department increases, in the contractual, you can see there, related to flock cameras, and I apologize, I did go through my notes again today, and also the other, I guess, fairly large increase in the contractual services was the contract with dispatching with AC/DC. And then the contractual, or the capital, decreased again due to there being no expanded level items included in this year's budget. And then other, again, we talked about that, the police pension contribution. So, really it's the pro services for the flock cameras, AC/DC, and the police pension. Those are really the drivers of the change within the police department.
Mayor, please.
Brad, I know I called you on this. So the AC/DC, I noticed there was a large jump, and maybe the chief can expand on it, but you said one town might have left, so whatever they were paying got redistributed to all the other communities. And so I think I asked you, well, if they had 20 people answering the phones, did they still need 20 and pass all that on to the municipalities?
Director Wilson?
I know you didn't really have a good answer for me. I told you I would ask.
That's fine. I would like to amend my answer to one entity instead of municipality, and then I'll have to defer to Chief Zito. He's probably say it better than I can.
So the majority of the cost increase was not due to the sheriff's office leaving. They eliminated 10 positions when the sheriff's office left.
Oh, okay.
The majority of the increase is Addison was subsidizing a large portion of AC/DC's operations over the years, and they were in the red each year, so they have tried to spread that out amongst all of the agencies they're dispatching for.
All right, now it's a little clearer now.
Alderman Art Woods?
Along the same lines, but it is a large increase, the 19.29%. Moving forward, is that increase believed to be less. This isn't going to be something that's going to be ongoing 20%, because if it is, then we need to figure out alternatives. I don't know if anybody knows that, but it sounds like that this is more of an anomaly because somebody's shifting costs from a group that was offsetting costs, right? Is that?
Chief?
Yeah, so I believe it's around $97,000 of that amount was from the flock cameras, which we had not had before. We've got ACDC's projections. We're actually due for an IGA renewal with them this spring, and they've laid out the next 2 years. I did compare it to the only other option we have, which is DUCOM. And just for comparison, an agency our size is Lyle. They're staffed at 38, we're staffed at 35. Our costs in fiscal year 25 were $440,000 with ACDC, and Lyle's costs were $534,000 with DUCOM. The sheriff's office leaving ACDC to go to DUCOM, they're actually paying about $300,000 more than they were with ACDC.
Thank you. Thank you for having that information here.
Mayor, please.
Yeah, thank you for all that, but I noticed, so it was 23,000 this year, and then another 82,000, but you already did the homework, so that's kudos, thank you.
Alderman Messina?
Question for the chief. You're gonna walk all the way back here just to get kudos, but it's a good thing. The actuals of last year were lower than prior years, which I plan to share, at least some of the meetings I go to. Any idea why?
For dispatch services?
Yeah, calls for service, yeah.
Calls for service.
I don't know if he sees this fancy sheet that we got. One of your performance metrics, right? Calls for service, overall calls for service went down actual from 14,743 in 2023 down to 13,882, almost 1,000 less calls last year.
So just keep in mind, calls for service incorporate traffic stops and officer self-initiated activity. And with the amount of officers we've been down, that's why that volume's lower.
I see it as a positive, but I didn't think of the negative. Okay. Thank you.
Please continue.
Move on to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. I guess the only thing is, in other, it's down this year. There's not scheduled to be 2 tests this year. This year included a patrol exam and the sergeant exam. So fiscal 26, there'll be no planned sergeant exam in this particular budget.
Mayor, please.
And just to be clear, right now, we're down 2 officers or somebody in 3, and anybody in training?
I think they just did the test right now, so I think they're creating the new list.
No, but I thought we had somebody at the academy, so I just want to make sure.
I think they're out.
So right now, staffing-wise, we're down 3. We have 2 out injured and 1 on light duty, so we're operating down 6, but we're looking to fill 3 positions. We just gave the online written exam to establish a new list. We had 146 take the test, 44 fail the test, 102 pass the test. So we're working off that new list of 102, and we're going to try to get in 3 to the Spring Academy, which starts at the end of April. It's going to be tough with the timeline we have and all the other testing they have to go through. If we don't get them to that academy, the next one will start in August.
All right, thank you.
Please continue.
To Public Works Administration. Just kind of the highlights here, the increase in contractual, largely due to the inclusion, due to the senior services program, which is the grass cutting program and the snow plowing program that we're running now. I have to defer to Mr. Lang for any questions on either of those programs. And then increasing commodities, there was a slight increase in the uniform allowance for the employees per the new Local 150 collective bargaining agreement that went into effect this year. So that's why commodities is up specifically in the uniform allowance line item.
Okay, please continue.
Moving on to the facilities management. So these are down. As you may or may not recall, we bid out a lot of things, cleaning of this building, supplies, things of that nature this year. And those bids, I think pretty much across the board all came in lower. So we were able to, again, realize some savings for the maintenance of the city's facilities through that process, and that's reflected here in the budget this year. Streets Division. So the increase in personnel above and beyond the ordinary costs is the certain staff, that being the dial-a-ride driver, was moved from the tourism fund into the Streets Division here in the general fund. Contractual services related down is down due to costs related to forestry, sidewalk maintenance, and landscaping. The sidewalk maintenance was reallocated to the capital projects fund, where we account for all of the streets and sidewalk, the bigger projects and whatnot. So that maintenance program is now going to be included in the routine programs within that particular budget line item of the CIP. And then landscaping, we did cut out the landscaping for the clock tower and moved that over to the tourism fund, specifically the clock tower with the advertising, trying to draw people to the city, whatnot. We want to maintain that that facility at the level that it is. So we did move those costs over a little bit.
Mayor,
So-
please.
Yep, Brett, so how much is that landscaping from the clock tower? Because I know the tourism fund's a little light, so I'm just curious. We took a body out of there, we added one over there more than before, now we're adding. So I want to hear all the numbers. I didn't catch that before, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Director Wilson?
Yeah, give me a second. I believe it's 20,000. I can check real quick.
I was going to say, like,
We'll get
is it
there.
15 or something, but, okay.
Yeah, I think it was 20. Yeah, 20,000 we moved over.
Okay,
So. And when we get to the tourism fund, we can kind of talk through a couple of those things. I
Oh, okay.
figure there'll be a question or two kind of
Right,
why the shifting around and so yeah.
okay,
But yeah.
no problem.
Alderman Art Woods?
I think you said this, we'll get to the explanation for that later, the shifting? Okay, so I'll wait.
Please continue.
Vehicle maintenance, increase in, dues and subscription commodities, 1,500, 2,000, so not significant increases, but just on a percentage basis, they were significant, but not on a real dollar basis. So that is the end of the general fund. So we will now move into the special revenue funds. Kind of see here on the summary page where each of these is at, and then we'll get into the individual slides here. So the road and bridge fund. I guess really the big difference is the interfund transfer, the transfer to SURF. The last few years, number of years, the road and bridge fund has been helping to pay for the costs related to the plow trucks, some of the larger vehicles and streets maintaining the roads and bridges. This particular budget cycle in the SURF schedule, there is not one program to be replaced, so we're not providing that funding this year. I believe next year there is one of the large plow trucks that's back on the SURF schedule to be replaced, so this interfund transfer will likely return next year, but for this year, since there's no plow truck, we didn't feel it really prudent this year to move money with no vehicle germane to significant street and bridge repair to be budgeted for.
Oh, Mayor, please.
Yeah, and to add to that SURF fund, I know I called you on this one also, but I saw it in the SURF fund. We still have quite a bit of surplus, probably enough to, I think it covered like 4 or 5 years worth of trucks and equipment, if I remember right. Correct? We'll see it later, but okay.
Please continue.
Sure. On the motor fuel tax, again, this is, should be fairly familiar. The interfund transfer is for some funding for Elizabeth Bridge, the city's match on that project. Also, the path, we did get the ITEP funding for that, so we do have a match on that. And then as well as the funding for the signalization of Irving Park and Central. That's really what that transfer is, the interfund transfer there. Increase in commodities due to some increase in electric costs over the past year and a half. And then contractuals down a little bit related to streetlight maintenance. We're kind of trending that out. Unfortunately, that one's kind of a break and fix types of thing. If not too many streetlights get hit, we don't have a lot of expenses, but if we have a run of people hitting streetlights, then we're gonna have a little bit more money spent on that. To the greatest extent we can. If we know who hit the streetlight, we will try to, go through their insurance, subrogate and get our money back. But sometimes they're hit and runs and we're unfortunately can't recoup any of our costs.
Okay, please continue.
Okay. Tourism fund. So I guess if we really look at the third bullet down, the policy states, fund balance policy states that we need to have a plan in place to restore the tourism fund to a positive fund balance. So if we go to the next slide, which a couple slides ago, it is showing a surplus this year of about $77,000. Which is good, so it is going in the right direction, the tourism fund. And that does include, all of the special events that the Special Events Committee and Council has put forth and voted on. And I guess kind of to answer the why people have moved in, moved out, et cetera. So one of the things that we heard last year during the budget conversation and through the special events committees that we had was kind of that confusion on what was included in that transfer back to the general fund. So part of the reallocation or realignment of certain staff members and then also this landscaping was to try and eliminate that transfer going forward. There might be a need for a slight transfer for some police and public works overtime in the future. But for right now, we feel fairly comfortable with moving those couple of staff members and this landscaping, that we're not gonna have to go back to that transfer model in the future. So we tried to do this to make it a little more transparent with the tourism fund, what those costs were. And then, like I said, to hopefully, aside from maybe 25 or 50,000 at some point down the road, eliminate the need for that transfer going forward and have everything just presented here in the tourism budget as a set and not try to have to, again, play around with that transfer.
Okay. Alderman Artwoods?
Yeah, for some clarity, we did a lot of bouncing back and forth, hopscotching, I think was an earlier term.
Yeah.
I just want to understand where we're at. So if you're telling me, because at one time we were 300 to the negative, was a number, now we've moved people into tourism, moved people out of tourism, we're adding landscaping to tourism, right? So at the end of this fiscal year, not the new budgeted one, can you give me a sense of where we're at? What is that number?
Director Wilson?
Sure. Yeah, so at the end of fiscal '23, audited numbers, fund balance deficit of $305,000. At the end of '24, audited was deficit of $478,000. And then last year is where we implemented some of those changes, specifically with the transfer and funding. We're projecting to end this year at negative, we'll call it 275, so about $200,000 improvement over the previous fiscal year. And then this year that we're talking about now, we're estimated to be about 198,000 deficit, so pickup of about $77,000.
Alderman Artwoods, follow-up?
So why then would we want to transfer more costs into there if our goal is to reduce that deficit?
Director Wilson?
That is a great question that we work through.
Because I'm assuming that if we creatively went around the city, I could come up with 5 other things that we could throw in tourism, right? Conversely, I could debate you and go, those don't need to be in tourism. I'm just trying to understand how we But the methodology of that was, and how we came up with, we're trying to reduce the overall deficit, and our idea is to increase the amount of expenses that are going in there, or new items that are going in there, not necessarily.
Sure.
Director Wilson?
So I think, again, as I kind of mentioned with that transfer going back and forth, because we did, and I went back and actually read the motion that we made last year, and I still apologize to Ms. Szabo for the expansiveness of that motion last year. You know, we eliminated the transfer from the tourism fund, the SURF fund. We played around with transfers from the water fund into the SURF fund and things like that. So I think the goal was to try to not have to go back to the transfer model for the tourism fund, and those costs that we basically reallocated or included in here now would have just been in a transfer line item. So again, to try to make this transparent for everybody, we wanted to show the actual expenses directly in here. Also, when we kind of talked through it, I think just like I said, at staff level, we knew it wasn't going to resolve itself in 1 year. So we wanted to, I hate to say do it right, but we wanted to build the tourism fund the right way. Because last year was a little bit of an interesting way around the world to get the budget built for the tourism fund last year. So we wanted to build it in a way that we could explain it without having to try to explain what a transfer is with these reallocations, and then also to make it sustainable so we wouldn't have to go back and keep kind of reallocating and then shifting costs around. So it might take a little bit longer to remedy itself, but as long as the fund balances are positive every year, it's going to resolve itself. And we think it's probably a more defendable model from a budgeting standpoint than the way we were doing it before.
Follow-up?
And for the most part, I understand those things, and I applaud the effort on staff's part to weave that in and transfer that across multiple budget years, right, to ease the pain. But I guess the thing I'm having the hardest problem with is, because I could make the argument, if I go to the triangle across the street, why don't we take the landscaping there and throw that into tourism too? And I could go down the block to the Veterans Memorial, right? And why don't we throw that landscaping in? I'm just wondering how landscaping, when there's landscaping throughout the city, became a tourism function. And if it's become that, where does that stop? I don't get the switch or the mechanism how, one, I heard what you said, because there's an advertising board above, so everything below is tourism. So if the sidewalk goes, it's tourism. If the pavers go, it's tourism. If it's, right, if the clock tower then needs repair, it's tourism, because that's the same argument. Not to be argumentative, I'm just trying to understand.
Director Wilson?
Yeah, I think to a large point, I think that was some of the inherent logic to that was we want to keep the clock tower, the advertising, the area underneath it. And I guess not to be, again, not argumentative, like, the triangle across the street. I don't know how many people are parking there and tourisming around that triangle.
I would argue the same amount of people that park right next to the clock tower.
That's very possible. I guess the concept with the clock tower is there is that advertising piece on the clock tower itself versus some of those other areas that don't have the active advertising or attempt to generate tourism. It's more of a passive use as opposed to a more, I guess, active, if you will, use with that signboard.
Follow-up?
So then, under that theory, the banners on the light poles, because they'll be, the light poles then be put under tourism because we have advertising banners on light poles?
Director Wilson?
So the banners are in the tourism fund. The light poles, there's a couple different non-general fund cost centers we could put those in, such as Road and Bridge or MFT. So we would probably leave those there. But push come to shove, I guess in theory, you could make that argument. I know some towns that have actually paved the roads because they said that if the roads are bad getting to the hotels, people won't want to go. Those are towns that have significant hotel blocks. So, I mean, that's, you're getting kind of far afield with paving roads with tourism fund money. But there are towns that have kind of gone to those lengths.
Follow-up?
Final comments, so then we can move on. I don't want to keep everyone here all night for this healthy debate, but that's exactly my point. Depending on where your perspective is, where you're coming from, you can allocate these dollars however you want, as long as you can make some shred of a reasonable argument for it. I'm only questioning it because we're trying to get the number to go down, so it seems counterproductive to find a new expense and throw the expense in. I get the switching people in and out, the personnel piece, just arbitrarily taking, well, here's a landscape expense, we'll just now throw it into tourism that it was never there before. That's it. No need to respond, we can move on.
Mayor, please.
Yeah, and by moving the video gaming back here is what's helping, right? Because that's why we've gone down a little bit. Probably should have did that a couple of years ago. But it's just my, all right.
That's another thing now. So
Alderman
number-
Artie.
No, you were done, you were done.
that was with my other line of questioning. So back to the video gaming, or that being, when was that put in 100% into the tourism fund? When did that switch back?
Director Wilson?
Sure, thank you. The last 4 months, so basically January of '24, it went back into the tourism fund. So there were 4 months of that in fiscal '24. And so then the entirety of fiscal '25, it was in there. And then obviously it's being programmed for the entirety in fiscal '26. So the last 4 months of fiscal '24 is when it got switched back.
And then one quick
Follow-up.
follow-up. So is the video gaming trajectory, is that still rising, or is it stagnated?
Director Wilson?
I mean, we're showing a $5,000 increase in this year's budget, but it has its ups and downs here and there. But it's, I guess, largely flat. I mean, maybe a little bit of an uptick here and there. Curiously, there is some seasonality to it. Ironically enough, around the holidays, we'll see an uptick. And then there's other times of years that we see an uptick in that as well. So also there have been a couple of, new businesses come on, and then when they expanded the number of machines that each location could have, that's kind of helped increase those numbers a little bit as well.
Okay, thanks.
Please continue.
So now for the actual sheet on tourism, the numbers, the personnel we've discussed, the contractual, the landscaping, we discussed that. And so everything else was really status quo. Again, we included the numbers that the council and or the special events committee has voted on and directed staff to include. So those are all included in there for this particular fiscal year. Narcotics forfeiture fund, maintenance of the city's K-9 unit. Nothing really different this year than previous years. TIF 1. So the contractual, we did increase it this year. We've received inquiries from, I guess, multiple taxing bodies about receiving some TIF funding for assistance for projects within their entity at their buildings that are located within the TIF. I'm not sure on the timing or the amount of these specific requests, but we did want to include a decent number in there. So like I said, I know there's 3 requests, and the 2 rough numbers I've heard, are sizable numbers, so we wanted to make sure we had some money in there. Obviously, as those requests come in, the $95,000 budget will be up to the council whether or not they want to fund those requests and at what level. So this is kind of, I think, like we had the conversation in the CIP with the facade, right? If somebody comes in with a program, and it goes, over budget, does the council still want to fund that? So that would kind of be the approach here. We put kind of a guesstimate of what we think some of those numbers would be, but obviously we would bring those before the council, and then, you know, if you wanted to approve those awards, then we would do so. The TIF one does have a pretty healthy fund balance, so if it does go over that number, it's not going to be specifically impactful at this moment in time to the TIF one fund.
Mayor, please.
Yeah, I know the water tower's coming out of this number as one, and then you mentioned the other taxing bodies or whatever. I see the ending balance, it's healthy. My question to the staff, and I know we don't have that answer tonight, and I'm not worried about it tonight, but something to think about, bring forward. Do we know what type of infrastructure that's needed that the city might still have to come up with in that area, in that TIF area? So, if, you know, whenever you guys get a chance, maybe it's a discussion and see where we stand.
Okay, please continue.
Sure. TIF 2, so we're technically currently sitting in TIF 2 right now. Again, this TIF was tailored to help, you know, the project next door at the former SPT bank site get built. So we did put the 25, some money in there. Really that's for any legal and consulting fees that may relate to the apartment project. But there's no specific other projects anticipated to be borne by TIF 2 during this particular fiscal year. TIF 3, this is where Cyrus One has broken ground to build their first data center. Again, we threw a little bit of money in there just for some legal or consulting services if need be, but we're not expecting there to be any significant projects in there, as we pretty much already know what's going to be constructed over there with those data centers. TIF 4, you know, the interest payments, that is for the bond issue that we just did. So when we did that issuance, we did include capitalized interest, so we effectively borrowed the first 2 years of interest and added that to the repayment schedule. So that $353,000 in interest payments, that is already in one of the city's bank accounts waiting to be paid. So, so we're going to see that this year, and then in the following year, we'll see another interest payments with principal starting back in year 3, and then there's a call in year 8 for that particular bond issuance. Again, we're not expecting there to be any other major costs to this, but we did put some monies in there just in case something comes up.
Mayor, please.
Yeah, so Brad, I know that first building that's going up, I believe, is in TIF 3. So when we start, and they're saying by the end of the year, so we might start seeing some money come next year, May or June or something. We're going to be able to take money from TIF 3 to start paying down this TIF 4. Is that correct? Do I understand that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
So the bond documents pledge TIF 3 and TIF 4 increment.
Okay.
Since the line of credit and the bond sale was germane to TIF 4 and that land acquisition, that's why this money got put into TIF 4.
Yeah.
So, but yes, you are correct, though. TIF 3 and TIF 4 are both going to be used to repay the debt service on that.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave anything to assumptions. All right.
Alderman Artie Woods.
Wasn't the total bond issue 10 million then to cover the extra?
Director Wilson.
Wound up being just a hair over 9.5 million. The not to exceed amount was 10 million.
Okay.
But it wound up after the phased 8 million phase reimbursing the city for the interest, and then the 2 years of the capitalized interest, debt issuance fees, you know, et cetera, came out to just a hair over 9.5 million.
And then follow up, what was the payoff of the line of credit? Wasn't it 8.7 something with the interest?
Director Wilson.
So yeah, the face was 8 million, and the interest was about 550,000 and change.
Okay. So we have roughly $1 million in a separate account to pay off. Until that TIF generates revenue, we have roughly $1 million sitting in an account to pay the interest.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alderman Art Woods.
Since we're discussing it. going back to the 8 million that then became 10 million. So for clarity, we borrowed an extra million to put in an account to pay the interest payments. So we can generate enough revenue out of either one of the TIF districts. Those are the facts. Do we have an idea of when we believe that we'd be able to eliminate that debt or that bond altogether? Is that going to be a 10-year thing, a 15-year thing? Do we have any understanding or enough knowledge of what's going to happen over there yet to figure that out?
Director Wilson?
I'll give it a solid, hopefully. I guess the real, trigger to the whole thing is going to be how the assessor assesses those buildings. We've used the model for assessing those buildings for projections based upon the Aurora buildings, because they're Cyrus One buildings in Aurora. And so the Cyrus One buildings in Aurora were assessed differently than other data centers, even within Aurora. So I've actually talked to the CFO, the finance director for Aurora, as well as our consultants at SB Friedman, and they both feel that we should be able to get that higher assessment off of these buildings because of how they're constructed, versus just, I guess, some of the other regular data centers. That being said, based upon their building timeline, we did put a call in, I believe, year 8 for these bonds, to call them and pay them off. So I think probably the early window, if everything goes as we anticipate or as we hope, would be about that 8-year mark. If not, like I said, we'll have to see how those assessments come in, and then it might be like that 10 to 12 window. But I think 8's probably the leading edge of that, and hopefully not more than 12. But again, it's really going to depend on how Assessor Kane and his staff assess those buildings once they come online and get built.
Follow-up?
Yeah, so as far as the assessment, obviously you got construction costs, right? We can theorize what those are going to be, but an empty building is worth less than a fully leased building, right? We witness that, see that every day in the market we'll look at apartments, or not apartments, but office buildings for sure, and now some logistics centers. So I just want to hope that we're being conservative and getting that done. That's my only concern, looking that, and that those guys stay on schedule. I'm hopeful that they do, right? Because the market's out there, so we're all hopeful that the thing gets leased up, and this is just a blip on the Wooddale's history, and we move forward and take care of all this thing. I'm just cautious.
Director Wilson?
Yeah, I would just say, and the call provision that we put in, it's not callable just at 8 years, so it's callable anytime after 8 years. Because I know when we did these 2 TIFs, the other taxing bodies wanted us to commit to closing these 2 TIFs out, as soon as reasonably possible. And also, I think the city, we would want to do that as well. So I think, to your point, I think we're hoping. I think that's also, we need ComEd to come in and run that power. They have that plan that I know they're working on with Ms. Springer and Mr. Lang. So to your point, we're optimistic as well, and we should get there.
Follow-up?
But since we brought up that power piece, do we know that that's on time, on schedule? Right, because that would be a...
Manager Murmas?
Absolutely perfect timing for that question. I was on a conference call.
Well, thank you. We're so simple.
We're in sync. I was on a conference call with DuPage mayors and managers yesterday. They had ComEd on the line, specifically talking about data center projects and how they're inundating Illinois, inundating DuPage. They used Wooddale as an example. Ours is one of the biggest, obviously. And the substation for Wooddale is on time at this point. And currently in the hopper, they have quite a few more requests for substations, but ours has already started and they expect it to be on time. So they are just exponentially in Illinois. The need for substations is exploding, and it's going to more than double every year, obviously, so it's not going away. But as far as I was told yesterday, everything looks good.
Follow-up?
Do we know what that timeframe is? Is that 2 months, 6 months, 8 months?
January, was it?
January?
20, January 26th.
26, yeah.
Right?
Well, I figured.
Next year, right.
Yeah, January 26th. Yeah,
That's what it was.
yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
And to that, are they able to lease the building or get it up and running before January? Is there enough power there? Because I know that there was some question of whether they could run one building or multiple buildings, and part of that question is how fast are we going to generate revenue?
Mayor, please.
Yeah, I thought the first building, they have the power, they need the substation for the rest of the buildings, if I remember correctly, but
Director
I
Wilson?
just conferred with Ms. Springer. Yeah, the first building can run at 40%
Okay.
before the substation gets put in.
I thought I remembered half, but I'm sure Ms. Springer is correct.
So.
All right, thank you.
Please continue.
All right, so with special revenue funds, moving into capital project funds, we have the capital project fund, the CIP, so that's what we discussed back in January. And then again, land acquisition fund, at this point, there's nothing specifically budgeted out of there for this particular year. So
Mayor,
again-
please.
sorry, Brad. And I know we went through the CIP, and there's projects, and we have grant money, and we're working through that. But when it comes to the interfund transfers and all that, I saw that we're basically now just under 6 months of cash in the general fund. And I know we've gone round and round. I go, well, we have cash in other accounts. Why doesn't that count? But it's not the general fund. Is that a next year thing that we're going to discuss? Because I know we had some anomalies this year. We'd like to get, well, that's our goal, to be always at 6 months or higher. So where is that going to come in? I'm just curious.
Director Wilson?
Yeah. Yes, obviously the goal is to get the general fund back over. Yeah, I think this year, as we talked at the beginning of the CIP meeting,
Right.
where we had to reallocate that utility tax over, this budget cycle was a bit more challenging than previous years. I think in the management letter, we say that next year is going to be another challenging year.
Right.
So obviously, we're making efforts to get back above 6 months. And obviously, it's based on actual results and where things come in. So yeah, I think, this year's budget as presented, keeps it right about where it is currently. So we'll try to add some more into that next year, but I think probably 28 is fiscal 28 is where we'll kind of get around that corner. Like I said, this year was tight, and I think next year is going to be as tight, if not tighter, from a budget construction standpoint.
Mayor, please.
Yeah. So again, our policy is 6 months. I think that's where we want to be as a council. But talking to other municipalities and mayors, 2 months is enough, 3 months is enough. Me personally, it doesn't work, because you're always going to get some kind of anomaly or something. I want to make sure we're ready for it, and I'm sure we'll have those conversations, but I know as we go through it that I'll be asking a lot of questions.
Alderman Artwoods?
Since we're on the subject, so where are we at?
5.5.
Director Wilson?
5 months, 2.5 weeks, 5 months?
Just over 6, I thought, no?
13
5.5?
13 days? And how did we determine that? What day did we pick to peg that we were at that number? Is that on a good day or a bad day?
Got it down to the hours.
Director Wilson?
Sure, yeah, it's about 5.5 months right now, and so I guess the point in time we pick is either the actual end of the fiscal year, the audited results, or the estimated ending fund balance in the budget as presented. So it's again, that's based on year-end numbers as a percentage of fund balance of expenses in the general fund.
Follow-up?
Yeah. So you mentioned that we're heading into some hard, lean times. What's the anticipated effect on that? Will that go to 5 months? Will it go to 5 months and 6 days? Do you have a feel for that?
Director Wilson?
Not at this time. I don't have a,
Fair enough.
I don't say enough confidence to say it. I mean, I probably in the back of my head have a guess, but I don't, not enough information right now really to,
All right, I
to
wasn't
state it, yeah.
sure, just figured it,
yeah.
Mayor,
since
please.
we're on the subject.
Yeah, and I know when we come to CIP for this following year, right, there might be some projects that may need to get cut or whatnot, but again, I just want to make sure we're on top of this because, you know, I know we're watching, right? We don't want to turn this into 3 months. That's ridiculous.
Please continue.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, the CIP, this is what we discussed on the 23rd. So the changes that were made are directed to be made that night are included in here, along with kind of rolling that sidewalk maintenance into the CIP. So that was the only additive change that came out during the operating budget. Land acquisition, again, like I said, there's nothing anticipated to be expensed this year. Obviously, if anything does come up, that would come before you as the council to vote on and direct staff to do so. This slide's actually kind of fun because on a budgeted basis, you know, we budgeted the $600,000 for the interest. Next year, obviously, that's not there. But if you look at the detail sheet, you know, you'll see the $9.5 million coming in. You'll see the $8 million loan repayment. So there's actually a lot of activity in fiscal '25 itself. But this slide just budget to budget. So it looks very innocuous. But like I said, once you get into the weeds and the actual project sheet, there's actually, this fund was actually kind of fun this year with everything going on with it.
Mayor, please.
Yep, Brad, so with the building next door, I know they put in the earnest money and everything, so, but the city's gonna get paid through the TIF on that project next door, is that correct? Because at first I thought we're getting a check, but then we're gonna get paid through the TIF. How did it all work out? Is that in here already?
Director Wilson?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that they're actually going to, I guess, write us a check for it. And so that's actually included in the CIP. It's actually under bond proceeds, it's just the string that it's in, but it's under sale of property, sale of city property. And so then that money will be used to pay down the line of credit with Itasca Bank
Right.
that was used to buy that property in the first place.
When do we anticipate this check?
Is it August, September? Ms. Springer, August, September? No later than the end of August, I believe that's
All right,
in the
September, got
IDA.
it.
Okay, please continue.
So under the enterprise funds, again, we have the commuter parking lot, the sanitation fund, and then the water and sewer fund. Commuter parking lot, you know, budget basis, some of these costs are down a little bit. Again, that has to do with the bidding out of the cleaning and some of the supply contracts that was mentioned in the facilities maintenance line items. Again, those same services, you know, the cleaning of the metro station, the supplies and whatnot, carry over the station as well as it does the City Hall, Police Department, 790, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why you'll see some of those contractual and commodities costs down this particular year for the metro parking lot. Everything else remains the same though.
Okay, please continue.
Sure, sanitation. Nothing real exciting here. Again, this is where we, the revenue from the utility bills goes in to pay for the residents, you know, garbage, recycling, yard waste services, and this is where we pay Flood Brothers out of. So that increase in contractual is due to the contract with Flood Brothers. We did check the contract and increase the budget number accordingly. And just as, you know, we kind of knew as that number was going to go up, that interfund number was going to go down. So the interfund transfer to the general fund went down that 20,000. As you'll see in a couple slides, the transfer to the general fund and the water fund went up 20,000. That was always kind of the plan. When we did this with the sanitation fund, 8 years ago, we dropped that transfer in the water fund and shifted it more over to the tourism fund to stabilize the water rate structure. And as time's gone on, that teeter-totters kind of come back And so it's reallocating back over to the waterfront from sanitation. So that was, like I said, that was known, 8 years ago when we started this process. We're just kind of, getting into that, rolling through that now at this part of the process. And I believe there's, after this year, one more year on the contract, and then we'll have to, either, see what we want to do with the garbage contract in a couple of years.
Okay, please continue.
Water and sewer fund. So here's a summary of revenues. Again, the general fund, some of the other operating funds going to be able to generate a little more revenue. The water fund, as we are spending down some of the cash for some of the bigger projects, Addison Road, the lift station, things of that nature, there is going to be less investable funds, so that's why we did pull the investment income for the water fund down a little bit. And then the lease interest, that's a function of one of our lovely GASB pronouncements, not the SPIDAs that you heard of last year, but the one before that. Also, we do have the cell tower leases that we do have annual increases in, so that's contributing to that as well. The interfund transfers, again, that stayed the same. That's for the water tower. And you may recall during the CIP, it may be 4.4, it may be 4.2, it may be 4.8. So whatever that number needs to be to construct the water tower, that's what it's going to be. Going on to the operating departments, utilities, modest increase of 50,000, just a little over 1%. Wastewater, and then capital. Again, those numbers are elevated because the water tower was in there. Obviously, it wasn't constructed, so we had to roll that forward from a budget standpoint. Same with Addison Road. So it's not like we're doing $16 million in capital projects over 2 years. Just a lot of the funding in 25 didn't get completed, so it's been rebudgeted into 26. Going into the utilities division, so this is the potable water, stormwater, and sanitary conveyance. Again, personnel, as we discussed, that staff member going from the finance department into the utilities division. Contractual going down a little bit related to maintenance of buildings and grounds. Again, the contractual issues with the public works analyst, the cleaning crew, supplies, things of that nature that flowed through to here as well. Commodities down a little bit due to water purchase. We've been following the water purchases over the past few years and kind of right-sizing that number as we're going along. The interfund transfer did go down. You may recall I just said that it went up 20,000 in the water fund, and you're seeing a negative number here, and you're going, Brad, how is that possible? Well, the transfer to SURF went down more than the increase went to the general fund. Some of the larger pieces of equipment in the water and sewer fund have been purchased over the last couple of years. So now we're slowing that funding down to the SURF fund based upon that SURF schedule, and looking out that 5 to 6 years, we felt comfortable slowing that down for these next few years until some of that bigger equipment starts to roll back on the fleet schedule. And then other largely increased due to depreciation. Moving on to wastewater. The increase in commodities is related to chemical supplies. And then principal and interest, you'll see principal payments up, interest payments down. Again, that's a teeter-totter. As you pay off more of the principal, you generate less interest every year. So that's a teeter-totter. That's why those effectively offset each other. Again, the decrease in interfund transfers, same deal. It went up. The transfer to the general fund went up, but the transfer to SURF went down by more than that, again, based on the SURF schedule. And again, other is up based on depreciation costs based upon last year's audited results.
Okay, please continue.
Capital division, again, we discussed this at the CIP meeting. Kind of the big ticket items in here is the Addison Road water main, the water tower, and I believe the ash lift station. Is this here? Yeah, the ash lift station. Those are kind of your big ticket items in the water capital division this year.
Okay, please continue.
The interfund, internal service fund is the SURF fund, so the vehicle replacement fund. So as you see, that change of a little over $500,000, we're drawing down on that. I believe there's still, close to $2 million in the fund balance on there. So again, this is a planned drawdown, and that's kind of why we pre-fund some of these purchases, so that when we get to some of these bigger years, we have the funding available to purchase these vehicles. So in a couple of the out years, the previous years were a little thin. Coming out of COVID, it was rather challenging to get vehicles. But now I think that market's stabilized mostly. So we're trying to get back on more of a regular schedule now that vehicles are seemingly more available. And I'm just wondering, do you have any comments on that accurate? Okay, all right. Yeah, so I think last year, we still got delayed. I think in some of the list of bills memos, I think I put in there, we ordered the car in 22. Manager Murmas called me, he's like, Brad, it's 25. You said we ordered this car in 22. That's correct. Some of the larger vehicles, the plows and stuff, I think we've had a upfit kit sitting over at Public Works for 4 months waiting on the chassis to arrive. So there's still some lags in there, but some of the smaller vehicles are more readily available, so we're able to get back on a more regular replacement schedule.
Alderman Art Woods.
Brad, did you just say that we had $2 million balance or fund balance in the surplus?
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Correct, yeah, I think it's
1.8.
1.8, I think.
So that has nothing to do with our 5.5 weeks.
No.
That's not counting.
First of all, months, not weeks.
I'm sorry. The mayor just struck out at me. 5.5 months.
Correct, yeah, but
Just for clarity, yeah.
yeah, correct. Yeah, those are two completely separate calculations.
Mayor, please.
Right, so that's why I've been asking Brad, so how much cash do we have in all these other funds? And I know because they're separate, right? That's why we're at the 5.5 months, but we have 1.8 million sitting, but that's probably like 4 to 5 years of trucks and cars and equipment. So that's why I asked if we could get a number of what's in cash in all accounts at some point. Doesn't have to be next week or the week after. At some point.
But next week would be good.
Before we pass the budget. How's that? Couple months.
Okay.
Please continue.
Sure. Moving into fiduciary funds, the only one we have this year, like I said, is the police pension fund. So I think, as you all know, that's not managed by the city. We have to report it on the city's books, but it's, I guess now technically all the investments are with the state, with the consolidation of the Article 3 and Article 4 pension funds, but it's managed by the Police Pension Board. And I know Treasurer Porch is on it, Chief Zito's on it, I believe Clerk Curielli's on that now as well. So we do have some members of the pension board in here. Again, it's largely, I guess, out of the city's control, and the increase in this year is for benefit payments for retirees. So the officers and the city contribute our percentages to the police pension fund, and then the retirees get paid their pension out of the police pension fund account.
Mayor, please.
Sorry, Brad, I didn't ask this question when I talked to you. But, so we budgeted 1.3 because market had a good year. They made an extra 500,000 at 1.8, but still, we have to put in an extra 350,000 on top of that. Is that because the actuarial study, or does that bring us at a higher funded percentage by doing this? I'm just curious, because I'm seeing an extra 500,000, so why the extra 300,000 on top of that? Are we trying to get the fund balance higher? Is that what's going on? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you. I know I didn't. At least if you don't have the answer tonight, anytime would be, I'm just curious.
Director Wilson.
Sure, yeah, no, so I guess probably the oversimplified answer is that's what the actuarial study says that we have to contribute.
And
so there was, if I may, there was an unfunded liability that had been in the fund that we're trying to correct. And so we've worked with Lauterbach and Amen to smooth that increase in. So actually, this $300,000 increase is the smoothed-in number. Without that smoothing, it'd have been, I think, over $500,000. So we are working with Lauterbach and Amen and now the state to resolve that issue and get that paid. We're still targeting 100% funded by 2040, so that's still our horizon. And so what this calculation is based upon, that horizon, taking into account all of the funding requirements.
Follow?
So what is it funded at right now? Because I know I ask this every year and it always changes. Do we know? I mean, if we don't have it right now, we don't need it right now. That's okay. You know.
Director Wilson?
We can get that and
Yeah.
give it to you, 'cause we're
Right, I'm just curious because one year we're at 80%, all of a sudden we're at 60%. And I know they've changed the tables and all this stuff. I'm just curious.
yeah, we'll have to get that. I know we have it, I don't want to give you the wrong answer.
Yeah, no problem. That's not a problem. I should have asked you, I think.
Alderman Artwoods?
Thanks. I don't think we were ever at 80%, but.
Oh, years ago.
One question I have is that number affected also by the shortage of officers, right? We have less officers paying into the system, right? And we have a pool that we have to meet the financial obligation, right, of the retired officers. And if we have less officers paying in, I would assume then that liability gets shifted to either you make it up in the market or the city has to.
Director Wilson?
Yeah, so that is true. The offset of that, though, is that if there are officers, then there's an implicit liability for their retirement that we have to account for as well. So, because they're going to draw a pension at some point in the future.
Right,
So
but that's a scaled in, right? The guy hired today, he's not retiring for minimally 20 years, so it's not
For sure.
a weighted even money
that is correct. But just,
thing. I'm just saying that there's an effect. So,
there is, sure.
Director Wilson?
And also just, I think one of the other factors too is officers are, I don't want to, broad brush, they're retiring earlier and living longer.
right.
So that's why those updates to those actuarial tables a few years ago had a pretty significant impact because they did more of a Chicagoland study on public safety versus, countrywide or whatever. So retiring earlier, living longer, and then they're drawing a higher pension, and then the people coming in, to your point, they are contributing, but at a lower salary than these recently retired ones. So there's a few different layers that are kind of stacking on top of each other.
Okay, please continue.
That's it.
Deanne? Are there any other questions relating to the budget? Alderman Artie Woods?
On capital projects on page 100, the 100,000 for the Wooddale and Commercial Park project, what are we doing with 100,000 towards a $8 to $10 million project?
Director Wilson?
Just curious.
Sure. So when we were, I guess, building the CIP end of last year, I guess we weren't sure how quickly everything was going to advance. So that 100,000 was, I guess, really for design,
Just a
maybe some more
placeholder.
bid documents, things of that nature. I guess maybe some landscaping. I'm not really completely sure, but I think the focus was more design, design work, maybe, bid preparations, things of that nature. To your point, yeah, it's probably not going to go too far on a $8 million project.
And with 26 and 27 being as tight as you think they are, I mean, there's really no need to do any more design work on this for the foreseeable future until we get everything back to, I mean, is there new money coming into the budget in 27 that's falling off, you know what I mean, in 26 to put towards starting that kind of project? In a phased approach, I know we're not writing a check for $8 to $10 million, but if, we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community about what their expectations are for that area, and I want to set them, when I'm asked about it, I want to set them properly for what we could expect.
Sure, yeah. So I think next year's budget, next year's CIP, I think we know that that's likely to be a priority from the council to try to get that going.
Right.
So we'll have to try to construct the CIP based upon with what we know, and try to prioritize certain things, like the park and maybe a couple other projects higher than other projects. So it's all really going to be about construction of the document next year. To your point, is there new money that's coming in? Unless, there's grants or something that Upland and Ms. Springer are working on, not specifically that I'm aware of. So it's really going to be prioritizing on what we want to put the money towards in the CIP versus
No, that makes sense.
what we don't want to.
And the 100,000 is basically, like you said, a placeholder design, generic, that's not shovel in the ground doing anything.
Likely not.
I'm saying,
yeah.
as it's, thank you.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, anything else? No, if there's no other questions, I'd like to make a motion to approve the fiscal year 2026 budget.
As read. Second.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Art Woods.
Yes.
Alderman Curriali,
Yes.
Alderman Messina.
Yes.
Alderman Sismarski.
Yes.
Alderwoman Ames.
Yes.
Alderman Artie Woods.
Yes.
And Alderman Catalano.
Yes.
And that passes. Items to be considered at future meetings, there are none. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.